Once again, good afternoon, all of you all. I hope you all are back
Good
from the break.
afternoon, sir.
Yes. So, students, we have Professor Bapat here, who will be talking on his topic in physics. Professor Bapat is the Dean for Academics at IISER Pune and a professor in the Department of Physics. He has completed his PhD from the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research after pursuing MSc from IIT Bombay. Sir successfully holds and handles multiple responsibilities at IISER and has also been instrumental in the establishment and mentoring IISER Tirupati as Dean. Sir has over 50 research papers and has generously worked with uh, an NGO called Eklavya for over a decade, and he has contributed in grooming of the teachers of various schools and colleges. So we welcome Professor Bapat to take over the session, sir. Sir, I guess you are on mute.
So,
Yes.
I hope all of you can hear me and see me. Can you?
Yes, sir. You are
Okay.
visible and audible.
Right. Okay, thanks. So I hope that this hour on, or maybe a little more than an hour on Sunday, is well worth the time and effort you're putting into it. And I hope that you will learn something out of today's lecture. And I would like this lecture to be, in an interactive manner. You can stop and ask questions whenever you want. Either, you can type it into the chat box, or you can, simply raise your hand and ask a question. You must have heard a whole range of topics in the last, this Sunday, previous Sunday, and so on. And you must have realized that there is a lot more for you to do as you grow up. There are many challenges. And I'm sure you have also found a few interesting things that you think you will like to do in the coming years or several years of your life. Now, the purpose of an Inspire Camp is to really expose you to a variety of things that you may not know about from your school studies. And today's topic is essentially something similar. All of you have been studying physics for several years now, maybe 3, 4, 5 years. And you must have studied, physics in some guise in your science subject in secondary and primary school. So you're really exposed to this subject for quite some time now. Now, when you study physics, you also study optics or about light. And this is really what I'm going to talk about today. And not light really in the sense that we normally understand it, but give you a few glimpses of what else one can see. So see not really only strictly in the sense of what we see with our eyes, but seeing what else is possible, going beyond what our eyes can show us. Anurag, you'll need to let me share my screen.
Sure, sir. I'll make you the co-host.
Right.
Yes, sir. You can try now.
Okay. Yes, I can. Okay. So can you see my screen? It says physics and its applications to seeing.
Yes, sir. It's visible.
Right. Okay, good. So this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about how physics, or the understanding of physics, or the developments in physics have allowed us to see much more than what our eyes can show us. This talk is, can be quite long if you wish to have it long. It can be short if you want to have it short. But please feel free to stop me at any point and ask questions where things are not clear. And we will wind up at a suitable time. Okay. Now, my slides have many pictures, and I'll admit that I have taken all of these pictures from the internet. There are many nice pictures that are available on the internet, which are really not, I can come nowhere close to making those kind of high quality pictures. And I use them freely, and I really thank all of those who took the effort to make these pictures. They'll be very useful as we go along. Okay, so what I'll be talking about is physics and its applications to seeing. And normally when we say I see something, we use our eyes. And eyes come in different shapes. They show us a whole range of things. It's really remarkable how much our eye can show us. Our eyes can show us very small things. They can show us very distant things. They can show us color. They can show us contrast. They can show us shapes. They can show us outlines. They can tell us whether something is transparent, semi-transparent, or completely opaque, and things like that. So our eyes are really very, very remarkable tools. We take so much for granted with our eyes that we never think for a moment how things would have been had we not been able to see. But what I'm going to try and show you is that although our eyes can indeed show us a lot, there's a big world beyond what our eyes can show. And I'll try and take you through this journey and tell you as we go along, how our understanding of physics has helped us develop these new ways of seeing. So when we are not able to see something, let's say something is behind a wall, or something is just so far away that you cannot see it, or you are just not in a position to see that because it is in some different country, different location, or different, whatever. So then the camera comes to our rescue. We have taken for granted a camera. Many of you are so small that you've probably not seen this kind of a camera. But your camera means something like this. Okay. So whether you're talking of a camera which is part of your phone, or whether you're talking of a classical camera, what both these devices do is that they capture light into some device, and this device then transfers that view or that image onto either a screen or a piece of paper or something like that, or a screen, or like on a large clock screen or a wall or something like that, like you see in a cinema hall. But essentially, it is just transferring light from one object, storing it in some form, and transferring it to the person who wants to see. This is what the camera does. It's a remarkable tool. It has, I would think it is one of the most, most fascinating and game-changing devices that mankind has invented. But what a camera does is typically, I'm not saying strictly, but typically what a camera does is it transfers what you would be able to see at the location of the camera, stores it and shows it to you again, irrespective of where you are. But there is a smaller world. There's a world of small things. There is a world of tiny things. And to see this, we use a microscope. I'm sure all of you are familiar with a microscope. Some of you might even have used one and found that it reveals many things that our eye cannot quite see. Now, the history of the camera or the history of the telescope is quite old, about 300 years or something like that. So a microscope is another device which shows you a completely different thing compared to what our eyes can normally see. So some of the things you might have seen, for example, cells in a leaf or cells in an onion peel, or taken a drop of blood and put it under the microscope and seen what constituents the blood has. Or if you just take a small piece of metal or a small piece of wood or any solid object and take a very thin slice and see this under the microscope, you will start seeing some structures which you are not able to see with your naked eye. So I have shown you some pictures here. These are pictures taken using a microscope. Okay. So that's one extreme of trying to see small things which are not normally visible by the naked eye. And for this purpose, a microscope is the device that we use. Now remember that as we go along, we will be talking about different length scales, and we'll mainly be focusing on small length scales, not on large length scales. On large length scales, you know that when you go from the scales of the size of the Earth to a larger size, you start thinking of planets, sun, the solar system, the stars which are far away, black holes, white dwarfs, red giants, nebulae, things like that, or the Akashganga or the Milky Way, all of these galaxies and constellations. But we are going to mainly talk about the small world. And for the small world, it is important that we keep in mind some length scales. Now, all of you are familiar with the millimeter scale, and you are also aware that if you go to smaller than millimeter sizes, then you require new units called the micrometer or the nanometer. So 1,000 micrometers is a millimeter, and 1,000 nanometer is a micrometer. Okay. So a human hair, for instance, is only about 20 micrometer thick, but you can still see it. You can see the human hair. A cell is typically of the order of 1 to 2 micrometer in size. So when I say size, I don't mean a length, but any direction you take the size, it will be roughly 2 micrometer. Now a cell cannot be seen by the human. The hair is roughly, very roughly, the limit of what our eyes can see. Okay. It may be a little smaller than that, but you certainly cannot see something that is only 2 micrometer in size. Now a DNA, which is something you might have heard of, and you might have very frequently heard of in these current times, is a coil, or it's a loop of some proteins, some molecules, some other chemicals. And this loop or this strand is about 5 nanometer in size. If I go to an atom, sorry, I made a mistake here. It is not 0.01 nanometer, but it's just 0.1 nanometer. An atom is roughly 0.1 nanometer in size. So if you look at these length scales, the atom is the smallest. And how much smaller is it? Well, it is very, very, very small. Compared to the human hair, it is about 10 million times smaller. Okay. But we do believe in atoms, right? I mean, all of us talk of atoms, we talk of molecules, but we have never been able to see them. Now, if we can't see atoms, why do we believe in them? What is it that convinces us that atoms must exist? Maybe you have the answers, maybe you don't have the answers, but I would urge you to consider this question very, very carefully. This is not the topic of our talk today, but maybe some of the things that I'm going to tell you might give you some hints about this question, about the answer to this question. But independently, I would really like you to think about this question. Why is it that we believe in atoms when we cannot see them? We cannot even see them with a microscope. With a microscope, you can probably go and see as small as a cell or some things inside a cell, but certainly not at the scale of 0.1 nanometer. So why do we believe in them? Okay, that's one question for you. Now, at the other extreme of the length scale, which is the scale in which we see galaxies and stars and so on, we use a different device. The device we use is a telescope, and a modern telescope is like what you see at the center. But an old telescope, say from 200 years ago, might have looked like that brass tube on the left. But this telescope made a very important contribution. It showed us that a big world existed at a scale which we could not imagine at that time. Maybe we can imagine this now. And this scale was way larger compared to anything that we knew at that point of time. And it also showed us very fascinating things about the universe. Now, keep in mind that all of these things, whether it's a telescope or a microscope or a camera, all of them require light. And when I say light, I really mean light that we can see with our eyes. So a telescope is an aid to seeing distant objects. A microscope is an aid to seeing nearby very small objects. And a camera is a device to transfer things that is visible onto a record and playing it back or showing it again repeatedly to anyone who wants to see this. But in all of this, what is important is that all these devices engage or capture light and use light to show us something. But now comes something very interesting. How many of you have seen this picture? Is there anyone who has seen this picture? Yes, there is somebody who has seen the picture.
Sir, I have seen.
Yes, you have seen this. Maybe there are more who have seen this. Okay. So this picture is a picture of the giant meter wavelength radio telescope at Khodad near Pune. And this is also a telescope. As you can see from the name, this is also a telescope. But this telescope is very different from this telescope. The telescope that you're seeing on the screen now is an optical telescope, or it sees only light that our eyes can detect. But this dish-like telescope does something completely different. It doesn't see light, or it doesn't capture light. It sees using what are called radio waves. Now, what are these radio waves? We'll see in a minute. Here are two more pictures. On the left is a picture of a house, which shows some funny colors. What are these funny colors? Well, they are not really colors. These colors, from dark to bright, merely tell you how hot an object is. Now, hot doesn't mean hot in the sense of you being able to touch it and understand or sense that it is hot. Hot just means that it is hot in the sense of having a certain temperature. So this house on the left, the bright areas are regions where the temperature is high. The dark patches are regions where the temperature is low. The same thing is true of the image on the right. This is an image of a crowd walking into some building. And you can see that some faces have been identified and some temperatures are associated with those boxes. Now, this is just, both of these are what are called infrared cameras or night vision cameras or infrared imaging cameras. And these are again devices that capture light in some form, but this is not the kind of light that we are able to see with our naked eyes. It's a different kind of light, and we'll come to in a minute what this kind of light is. It's a different light. Just keep this in mind. The picture on the right has become very important due to these COVID times when people are thermally screened. You might have heard the term thermal screening. So thermal screening is another way of seeing. One more way that you can see things or see images using satellites. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with your navigation and maps on your phone. These maps on the phone or any web-based device that show you maps or pictures of cities, of streets, of houses, and so on, are all pictures taken from a distance by a satellite or through a satellite. But these are not pictures using ordinary light. So once again, an example of being able to see something using not ordinary light, but something else. What is used here are microwaves. And these microwaves are then, these microwave images or these microwave signals are processed in some form, in some manner, and converted into an image that would match more or less what our eye would have seen had there been no obstruction. Meaning, had there been no atmosphere. If you had seen this city, as is shown in this picture, from a great distance from the top, this is what you would have seen if the atmosphere were not there. Since the atmosphere is there, you're not able to see things at a great distance because of the haze and clouds and so on. But if this atmosphere were not there, then the human eye would have seen something like what is shown in this picture. But this picture or this image has been taken not using ordinary light, but what are called microwaves. So all these names that I just mentioned are really part of something bigger, some grander design. What you're seeing now is, again, I'm sure many of you would have seen in some form, either an X-ray photograph of a hand or some broken bone or a fracture or whatever. And this is, again, something we are able to see, not with our naked eye, but using a device, using some kind of a gadget. In this case, this is an X-ray camera or an X-ray detector. And this again uses light in some form, but not the kind of light that our eyes can see. This is what is called X-rays. Okay. X-ray devices or X-ray cameras have become extremely commonplace because of security concerns, because of medical reasons, medical imaging reasons, and so on. Everything that I told you just now, be it microwaves, be it meter waves, be it radio waves, be it X-rays, be it infrared, ultraviolet, whatever. Okay. All of this is really part of a very large and a grand design. Okay. Visible light, infrared light, ultraviolet light, X-rays, radio waves, meter wavelengths, microwaves. These are all parts or sections or segments of what is called the electromagnetic spectrum. Okay. On the top part of this slide, I've shown you a gray band. And on the gray band, you will see a scale like you have on your normal plastic scale in your compost box. But the scale has different markings. On the top, you will see 10 raised to 24, 22, 20, 18, and so on, all the way down to 10 raised to minus 6 or 8, something like that. At the bottom, you will again see another set of numbers, 10 raised to minus 16, minus 14, so on, going all the way to 10 raised to 12. Okay. The top numbers, the numbers on the top, are the frequencies of the electromagnetic wave. On the bottom are the wavelengths of the same wave. So if I take a wave which is, say, here where my cursor is, okay, that wave will have a wavelength of 10 raised to minus 3 meter. It will have a frequency which is about 10 raised to 11 hertz. What does that mean? Well, to a layperson, it means nothing. But if you are a physicist, you must try and understand this. What it means is that there's some source which is emitting electromagnetic waves because of the oscillations of charges. And depending on how the charges inside the material are oscillating or are being made to oscillate, the radiation coming out, the electromagnetic radiation coming out, has a certain frequency. If the radiation frequency happens to lie around 10 to the 15 hertz, which is here, this band, which corresponds to a wavelength of about 10 to the minus 7 meter, then that part of the electromagnetic radiation is visible to us. Our eyes are sensitive to that part of the spectrum, that part of the electromagnetic spectrum. And the spectrum at the short wavelength or high frequency gives us a sensation of violet or blue. The same spectrum at the other extreme of our visible limit, which is around 700 nanometer, gives us a sensation of red. So this you probably know. So this wavelength you know. But maybe what you did not know is that the same kind of spectrum with shorter and shorter wavelengths gives rise to X-rays. Longer and longer wavelengths gives rise to infrared, microwave, radio waves, and so on. Now, all of these wavelengths or wavelength bands allow us to see something, or not through our eyes, but using different devices, such as the infrared camera or the thermal imager or microwave detectors or X-ray detectors, and so on and so forth. Our eye, and in turn, a normal camera, a normal microscope, and a normal telescope only relate to this 400 to 700 nanometer band of extremely narrow band of wavelengths that our eye is sensitive to. So let us now focus on just a bit on the visible part. Are there any questions here? I can see something in the chat. No, okay. So a microscope and X-rays are two things that I'm going to pay a little more attention to. We are going to focus a little more on these two things. A microscope, as you know, and many of you must have seen this, permits us to see the micro world, and it shows us a world that we would not otherwise be able to see. Similarly, X-rays also show us a different world. For example, our bones, which you would not be able to see otherwise. And if you are a biologist, then you might actually be more interested in this topic than you would be if you were not interested in biology, which is that can we now somehow combine the idea of a microscope and an X-ray in order to see something very small and something that is not visible using light. In other words, would it be possible to have an X-ray microscope? Because an X-ray microscope is a nice idea, because at least in imagination, it's a nice idea, because it would allow us to see something inside a surface, like your bones, which you're not able to see with the normal eye, and also combine the properties of a microscope and see very tiny things, which again you are not able to see with your naked eye. So this would be a very powerful tool. But unfortunately, an X-ray microscope is not possible. And in fact, even a normal light microscope has some limitations. You might wonder why the same thing as a light microscope cannot see objects smaller and smaller and smaller. Why can it not see objects which are of the size of, say, the DNA? If you remember, the DNA has a length scale which is of the order of 5 nanometer, and 2 micrometer, which is the size of a cell, seems to be the limit of what an optical microscope or a normal microscope can see. Or a normal microscope cannot see the DNA. The reason why a microscope cannot see something smaller than, say, about 0.5 micron, a micrometer, has simply to do with the fact that the wavelength of light is 0.5 micrometer. And that is why the idea of an X-ray microscope is very fascinating, because the X-rays have shorter wavelengths. So we should be able to see even smaller things using an X-ray, just like we can see smaller things using an optical microscope. Instead of an optical microscope, if we had an X-ray microscope, we would be able to see things which are even smaller and smaller. But unfortunately, that doesn't work. And the reason why it doesn't work is also partly the reason why X-rays are so successful in showing us what is under your skin or hidden behind something. Okay. So X-rays penetrate through most matter. And when they penetrate through most matter, what happens is that it is not possible to focus them or reflect them as it is possible to do with normal light, because of the immense penetrative power. So if you want to try and make a telescope or a microscope, not a telescope, a microscope using X-rays, then this will just not work, because for a microscope, a normal microscope to work, you need to have a lens which will do the focusing, or multiple lenses will do the focusing. And this is simply not possible with an X-ray microscope. So an X-ray microscope, although it's a fascinating idea, and at least you can imagine that an X-ray microscope will be able to show you a lot of small things. This just doesn't, physics tells you that this is not going to work. Now, if you want to see something smaller, and as you know, we have been able to see things which are smaller than what the normal microscope can show, because you hear people talking about DNA, you hear people talking about atoms, you hear people talking about molecules and so on. And none of these things have been seen really. So how do you beat this wavelength imposed limit? Light has a wavelength of about 0.5, 0.4 micrometer, and nothing smaller than that can be seen using light. So how do we go to smaller scales? So for this, we need to go back about 100 years. About 100 years ago, a very new and a very strange kind of set of ideas in physics came to the fore. This was to do with ideas relating to, say, the stability of atoms, or some very strange observations that people had made, which could not be explained using the normal rules of physics. The normal rules of physics would predict, or do predict, that an atom, which consists of a positively charged nucleus and an electron, should not be a stable entity at all. It should just disappear. That is what rules of classical mechanics or normal mechanics would predict. So some new rules had to be found, or had to be discovered, in order to explain the obvious stability of atoms and many other things that are related to the small world, or that whose roots lie in the small world. The rules of quantum mechanics actually turn out to be very, very strange. We are not going to discuss those. We'll talk about it a little bit, but not too much. And these rules actually throw very, very uncomfortable questions for somebody who is not quite into it, for the ordinary person. But these rules, these new rules of quantum mechanics, they help you understand, and they explain a lot of things about atoms, molecules, solids, and chemistry, chemical reactions, whatnot, all kinds of things. All of your modern devices which use electronics, which use semiconductors, which use integrated circuits, all of these depend very, very heavily on our understanding of this quantum world. So quantum mechanics led to a complete revolution in the development of physics, and it also led to many, many applications whose fruits we are reaping today. Okay. So let us quickly try and understand a little bit about quantum mechanics and see how it is related to our being able to see things differently. Now, one of the main or important postulates. Now, I hope you understand what a postulate is. A postulate is an assumption, something that you assume and you believe is true, and whose truth will enable you to say something more and build upon that statement. Okay. So a primary postulate of quantum mechanics is that, unlike in the normal world, where you can say that there is a wave and there is a particle, like you have waves of sound, you have waves of light, you have waves on a water surface, or you have earthquake waves, and so on and so forth. That is one kind of transfer of energy. When a wave travels, it takes energy with it. Then there is another set of things, or entities called particles. Now in physics, a particle doesn't need to be small. A particle can be a large object. And these objects, when they move, they carry energy. And there is no wave-like character associated with them. They just move in straight lines. Okay? But in quantum mechanics, there's a problem. The postulates of quantum mechanics, which were formulated based on experimental observations, say that, well, the distinction between a wave and a particle, or wave-like properties and particle-like properties, become very blurred when you go to extremely small scales. And when I say small scales, we are talking really of the scales of atoms and molecules, or something a little larger than that. Okay. So when these idea of particles and waves, which are distinct entities in normal understanding, in normal mechanics or in classical mechanics, this distinction has to be done away with. Instead, what we say that the two are really the same entity. But if you go to large scales, then the particle features and the wave features separate out. But on the small scale, on the scale of atoms and molecules, they really refer to the same entity. In 1922, a French scientist called Louis de Broglie proposed that for every particle, there must be an associated wave whose wavelength, he said, can be written down. He suggested that this wavelength could be written down in a manner that lambda, the wavelength, is proportional to 1 upon the momentum of the particle. So if a particle is moving fast and has a large mass, then it will have an extremely small de Broglie wavelength, or what is called the matter wavelength. If the particle is moving slowly and has a small mass, then the associated wavelength will be much, much longer. Okay. So this postulate, which is a very strange postulate, okay, or strange proposition, is really at the cornerstone of quantum mechanics. It is at the basis, it's one of the bases of quantum mechanics. Now you might ask, why are we doing this quantum mechanics? What has it got to do with being able to see? Now you'll remember that we were talking of light and its interaction with matter and reflection, or you manipulate it using lenses and so on. And finally, it hits our eye. And in the eye, a chemical reaction happens, because of which we are able to see a very small band of electromagnetic wavelengths. We are sensitive to a very small band. We also found that because of a certain property of light and for all electromagnetic radiation, there is a limit on how small an object you can see. Okay. If the wavelength is some lambda, then typically you will not be able to see light, see anything that is of a size smaller than lambda. Okay. Now here is another kind of wave. This is a matter wave, and this matter wave is also associated with the speed of a particle. So let's say we take a particle and throw it very fast at a very high speed. Quantum mechanics and this de Broglie idea, they suggest that with this moving particle is associated a wave. Can we use that wave to see something? And again, see not in the sense of seeing it with our eye, but seeing it in the same sense that a radio telescope sees distant objects. Of course, the radio telescope uses much longer wavelengths, or a microwave satellite image uses much larger wavelengths. But here, at the other extreme, we are trying to use different kinds of wavelengths, a different kind of wave, whose wavelengths are much smaller. So maybe there's a device which allows you to sense these waves and build a device which will be able to see things whose length scales are extremely small, because the wavelengths that we're talking about in this example of de Broglie or matter waves are actually very, very small waves. Okay, these waves are much smaller. These wavelengths are much smaller than the optical wavelengths. Okay. So the idea is actually quite straightforward. You start. Okay, so if you do not understand much from this slide, don't worry, just listen to what I'm saying. I'll just keep this slide, but don't worry too much about it. We said that for a particle to have some waves associated with it, it needs to have a momentum. If the momentum is 0, then there's no wavelength associated. So let us say we take particles which we can give a large momentum to. So if you throw a ball, you give it a momentum. Similarly, you find a particle whose momentum is large, but the particles themselves are very small. Okay. And then try and see what kind of matter waves get generated. So here is an example. What you are seeing here is what is called an electron gun. So the particles that we are going to talk about, or the particle wave particle duality that we are going to talk about, is in the context of electrons. If an electron has an energy E, or if it has an energy which is usually written in terms of volts, you might be familiar with this, these or electron volts, then the wavelength is given by the box, the pink box that I've written on the right. But on the top is an image or is a figure of a very simple device to generate a beam of electrons. It is called an electron gun. So let's not worry about how an electron beam is produced or electrons are liberated. All you need to remember is that this entire device has to be in vacuum. You cannot just keep it in air. Okay, so let's say you find some way to keep this in vacuum, and you heat this wire, this black dark thing, which is called a filament current supply, that is supplying a lot of current, a lot of power, electrical power to a tip which emits electrons. Okay, so let's not worry about how that happens. That is also a quantum mechanical process. Okay. Now, once these particles are emitted in the form of a beam, this gray beam that you are able to see here, okay, this beam. Now, this is like a light beam. Right? It is like when you shine a torch. When you shine a torch, a beam of light or a pencil of light gets emitted. Similarly, there is a pencil of electrons getting emitted. Now, these electrons don't have a wavelength associated with it in the same manner that normal light does, but instead it has a different wavelength, a matter wavelength, which is given by this formula. So h is what is called the Planck's constant. Planck's constant is an extremely tiny number. In some units, it is 10 raised to minus 34. Okay. So really very tiny. And now you have this number, 2 is 2, m is mass of the electron, q is charge of the electron, and v is the voltage that you apply to this electron gun. So electrons are charged particles, so electrical voltages will give it an energy. Just keep this small bit in mind. So you have a way to create a beam, and with this beam, which has an associated wavelength lambda, we'll try and see whether we can do something which is very similar to an optical microscope. An optical microscope uses light. Here, we are going to use an electron source instead of a light source. Okay, so here are two figures. On the left is a figure for an electron source and a light source on the right. An electron microscope on the left, an optical microscope on the right. So you will see that at least in the diagram, okay, they don't look the same in reality, but in terms of the scheme, in terms of the diagram, they look very similar. And they are indeed very similar. And the connection between them is the matter wave that is associated with particles. Just as light has waves, electrons also have associated waves, but they are different kinds of waves and they can be manipulated using different devices. Light waves can be manipulated using lenses and mirrors, whereas an electron source requires electric and magnetic fields to manipulate. Okay. But the principles are the same. You can start with an electron source just as you start with a light source, put an aperture, put a lens, put a magnetic lens. Then you keep a specimen, what you want to see. Okay. And then the light gets transmitted, again collected, and it falls on a screen. So this is a optical microscope where your screen is essentially your eye. Here, however, just like you have lenses over here, you have lenses here, and the screen is not your eye, but it is a real screen. I mean, it's a flat surface upon which these electrons, which are emitted from here, get focused, pass through the sample, again get collected, and they get projected on the screen. Now, the screen will emit light when electrons fall on it. So in the end, we are again going to see using light, but what we'll see is not the same kind of image that you will see here. You will see a different kind of image, and I'll show you some examples. Okay, I could see some questions over here. Okay, I did not understand it. So that's what we are trying to understand. So an electron microscope is a device which creates a beam of electrons. These beams or these electrons are manipulated in some manner using magnetic fields. When I say manipulate, I just mean that they are turned or focused or their energy is changed. And then these electrons pass through a specimen, say for example, a cell. Then again, these electrons, when they come out, they are collected and then focused on a screen. And this is exactly like an optical microscope. The details are very, they're quite complex, but they are very similar to this. And because of a similar construction or similar principle, these electrons, whose matter waves behave exactly the same way as optical waves, allow us to create images on a screen. Now, the main difference and the most interesting part is that here the wavelength of the electrons, the wavelength associated with the electrons, is related to the voltages in the microscope, okay, or the voltages in the electron source, and that voltage can be controlled. And because the voltage can be controlled, the associated wavelength can also be controlled. That is not true of light. The light is whatever light you get, that's all you can use. Okay. So these electron lenses, a slightly more detailed diagram is shown here, where actually, you might be very surprised at this. The first electron microscope was devised or built as long back as 90 years ago. A modern electron microscope might look something like this. Again, quite similar to an optical microscope, but based on the principles of matter waves, based on the principle of manipulation of electrons using electric and magnetic fields. And of course, this whole thing has to be done in vacuum. Are there questions? Yes, please ask.
Sir, as we know that source of light could be like sunlight. So what is the source for electrons?
Right. The source for electrons is, see, if you take a metal wire, not all metals, some metals are better than other metals. Have you seen this old type of light bulb, the one inside which there is a very thin wire?
Yes.
It has these two pins in a glass bulb, and there's a very thin wire which is connected between these two pins or these two strands. Have you seen that kind of a bulb?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that filament is made of tungsten. Now you should take a tungsten filament and heat it much higher than what it is normally heated in a bulb. Electrons from the tungsten metal start escaping. They start leaving the tungsten. This can happen with other metals also, but tungsten is more suitable. So these electrons escape the tungsten surface. Okay, and that is really the arrangement that is shown over here. So probably not very easy to follow, but this filament, okay, this V-shaped filament is really a tungsten filament, and the tip is bent. It is bent at the tip, and because the tip is bent like that, this tungsten wire, when a current is passed through it, will get extremely hot at the tip. And when it gets extremely hot, when I say extremely hot, this means about 1500 degrees Celsius. Then electrons start escaping from the tip. Now, by putting some voltages, you can make these electrons move in a particular direction and create a beam of electrons. So that is how you generate, and that's what an electron source, the simplest electron source is.
Okay, so thank you.
Yes, Rehan, you had a question.
No, sir. I forgot to lower my head.
Okay. So is there any other question here? Chat. There is. Okay. How is it possible to capture images of black holes? Okay, so that's the other scale, other extreme. We will probably not go to that today, but it uses what are called gravitational waves. So these are matter waves, what I just talked about. But there are also what are called gravitational waves, but that's a completely different topic. Right. So here are some images of objects that have been captured using electron microscopes. So on the left top is a cell. On the right here are some viruses. These are some other smaller organisms, microorganisms. And here is a mineral. The bottom right is a mineral. So you can see that this kind of detail. Now, what are the length scales here? If you look at this carefully, you may not be able to see this number over here. So I'll read it out for you. So see this, if you look at the bottom of this image, then the entire width, the width of the image with these flakes of a mineral, the width is 500 micrometer. So now you can imagine how small each of these thin layers is. Each of these layers is like maybe 1 or 2 micrometers. This is even smaller. And this, as you can see, is a cell, and you can see the insides of a cell very, very clearly. All of these images are using an electron microscope. In this case, the bottom left case, this is actually just 2 microns wide. So extremely high resolution, as it is called, or you're able to magnify this to a very, very high value. And with further developments, not just electron microscopy, but other associated developments, a new and a similar technique, somewhat similar technique of scanning electron microscopy came in, or tunneling electron microscopy came in. Now, using this scanning tunneling electron microscopy, where again we make use of the matter waves associated with an electron, and you measure very tiny electron currents, it is now possible to even really see, or as in get images of single atoms. So the belief in atoms, which came about more than 100 years ago, that belief has been realized, or so to speak, the atoms have been seen, and so the proof is there in being able to see these atoms using this technique of electron microscope. So, one completely new idea, the quantum mechanics idea, the idea of wave-particle duality, it led to a technological development in the field of electron microscopy. And because of this development, we are able to now see things on a very, very, very tiny scale, things that would never have been able to see using light microscopes, because light microscopes have their own limitations. Now, we are nearly completed an hour. So what we'll do is we'll just take one more topic now. We can talk about a lot of things, but we'll just take one more topic now, which is actually related to the use of lasers. So the other fallout, or another development in quantum mechanics, was a development of the understanding of how the energy of the particles inside the atom is. So the energy inside the particle, the energy of the particles inside the atom is essentially the electron energy. Now, electrons in an atom, so you know that hydrogen atom has 1 electron, helium has 2, and so on. These atoms have what are called energy levels, which means that the energy of the particles inside the atom can only be some definite numbers. It cannot be anything that they like. So it can be, say, 1 or 1.5, but not 1.3, for example. Okay, I'm just giving you a number. These may not be correct, but if 1 is possible, then maybe 1.1 is not possible, or any intermediate number is not possible. So you are normally used to thinking that if I change the speed of a particle, the kinetic energy will change uniformly or continuously. But that doesn't happen in quantum mechanics. In quantum mechanics, the energy can change only in what are called discrete steps. So it goes from one value to the next. There could be many values in between, but those are not allowed, and so on and so forth. So there are many rules, forbidden rules, and so on. Rules of forbidding energies and so on. Now, because of this very strange nature, it becomes possible to generate light of very definite frequencies. Now, this is a very, very weird connection. You are able to generate light of very definite frequencies, very sharply defined frequencies, because of this discrete nature of the energies inside an atom. So imagine something like this. Suppose you have a staircase and you are allowed to keep a ball on any step or any step. So if the ball falls down from one step to the other, then the energy that the potential energy that the ball will lose can only be some definite values. Let's say the steps are 1 meter apart and the mass of the ball is 1 kilogram. Then you know that mgh is the potential energy. So mgh can be mg, 2 mg, 3 mg, 4 mg, 5 mg. So when the ball falls from one step to the other, its energy can change only by 1 gh. It cannot change by half a gh or 0.7 gh or 0.3 gh. Sorry, mg, not h. It can change only in certain discrete values. The same is true of energy levels in an atom. And what happens is, if you remember, I said at the beginning that electromagnetic waves are emitted when charged particles, specifically or particularly electrons, when they move. So here is an electron which is moving from one step to the other step. Now, if that movement is downward, meaning that it is losing energy, then this energy is given out in the form of electromagnetic radiation. Because these energies are discrete or these steps are fixed, the amount of energy that is given out as electromagnetic radiation will also be fixed. It cannot be any arbitrary number. It can only be a certain definite number, right? And because of this difference compared to normal light, the light that is emitted in a laser, which is based on this principle, will have a very definite wavelength. So unlike normal light, this laser light is has an extremely well-defined wavelength. It has only almost, you could say, it has only one wavelength. Now, if you remember, when we are talking about optical microscopes, we are talking of how, because of this wavelength imposed limit, we are not able to see things beyond a certain scale or smaller than a certain scale. Now, due to these invention of the laser, and lasers can come in very different sizes. Okay, the one on the left, which is about 1 meter in size, is also a laser, and the one on the right, which is smaller than a coin, is also a laser. So lasers don't have to be big or small; they can be different sizes. Because of this advent of lasers, a new idea came up, which is called confocal microscopy. You may not have heard of this, but just keep this in mind. I'm not going to talk too much about this. But it is because of this understanding of quantum mechanics, and because we are able to manipulate light so well now, using laser light so well, you can actually start looking at the images of objects in an extremely great detail. So normally when you focus light, when you take an image using your camera, let's say I have a flower or a plant with a flower, and I take a photograph. The image of the flower and the leaves around it is equally sharp in your camera. But by doing some tricks, which is called adjusting the depth of focus, you can make the flower very sharp and the leaves blurred, if the distance between the leaf and the flower is non-zero, meaning if it is significant. So if the leaf is slightly behind or slightly ahead compared to the flower with respect to you, you can make the flower very sharp, the leaf blurred. Okay. But to what extent you can do this with ordinary light is again decided by the wavelength of light. So we have seen that you cannot see objects smaller than a cell. So if there are two cells, one on top of the other, okay, you will not be able to say that there are two different cells if the size of the cell is comparable to the wavelength of the light that you are using. Now, because these lasers have some very remarkable properties, using laser light instead of ordinary light, you can actually distinguish between two cells that are only slightly far away. You can even go one step beyond and start looking at different layers within a cell, okay, which is what is shown here. I don't know if you can see this picture very clearly. So here is a cell which has some kind of tentacles, and this light that you are seeing here, okay, there's a green light and there's a red light. Okay. So you can see three different planes, three focal planes, 1, 2, 3. So you can tune the confocal microscope in such a manner that you can start seeing things in different planes sharply depending on how you have set the microscope. So you can do slices. You can see slices within a cell. Now a cell is already very small. The cell is about 10 microns, so 5 microns or something like that, or even a micron. And you can start now seeing layers after layers within a cell. This again has become possible because of laser light, and this has become in turn possible because of our understanding of quantum mechanics. So in summary, there are 4 or 5 things I would like you to remember. The first one is that when we normally see, we are using only a very narrow band of electromagnetic wavelengths. Second, when we use a microscope or a telescope or a camera, all we are doing is we are transferring that light, in the case of a camera, to a film or a sensor or whatever, store that image and pass it on to whoever wants to look at it. In a microscope, the light comes to the microscope, the object gets magnified, so you see a large image. In a telescope, the same thing happens, but you are looking at distant objects. In a microscope, you are looking at near objects and extremely small things. And in the case of telescope, you are looking at distant things and they appear larger. But again, you are limited to using the same band of electromagnetic waves to which our eye is sensitive. If you go beyond that and start looking at different wavelengths and using different devices, try to see what is there in these different wavelengths. So the objects that are being observed are emitting different wavelengths, such as the radio wavelengths, infrared wavelengths, microwaves, and any other band of the electromagnetic spectrum. Similarly, if you use X-rays if you shine X-rays on something, these X-rays will penetrate through the matter and it will cast a shadow of objects which it cannot penetrate, such as our bones in the body. Okay. Now you change the wavelength of the X-ray and you start seeing different things depending on the penetration power. All of these are again electromagnetic waves. Then we saw that there is yet another type of wave called the matter wave, which is a property of matter at the very small scale, at the scale of the atoms or thereabouts. And associated with this is with particles is also a matter wave. Every particle is a matter wave. And making use of this property, this dual property, you can use electron beams to do imaging. And by doing electron beam imaging or electron microscopy, we are able to see inside cells. We are able to see much smaller scales than we would have imagined with ordinary. The rules of quantum mechanics or the principles of quantum mechanics allowed us or made us realize that the structure of energy levels in atoms is very different from what we think or we used to think. And because of this discrete nature of the electron energy levels, you could generate light of very specific frequencies in the form of a laser. And using a laser, you can do even better microscopy than what is normally possible. Okay. So that's the summary of what we talked about. And the message I want you to take home, to remember, is that many theoretical and conceptual advances in physics are responsible for the whole range of things that we are able to see today. What are we able to see? We are able to see the small world. We are able to see the large world. We are able to see things which are not normally seen by the eye, such as thermal images, X-ray images, microwave images from satellite, radio images from radio telescopes, and so on. But all of this is possible because of good understanding of physics, because of constant experimentation, because of constant theoretical advances. And these advances then get translated into applications, some of which we talked about. And these kind of very exciting developments, they are still happening, they're happening even today. Okay, who knows? I mean, tomorrow we might be able to, create images of smells. Today, if you can see your friends on a camera, on your phone. 20 years ago, you could not think of a video call. Now, today, what you do is when you make some nice dish, you take a photograph of the dish and send it to your friend, okay, saying that this is what I ate. But your friend is not able to either smell it or taste it. But who knows? You might have a technology tomorrow which will allow you to transfer taste and smell. Take an image. I should not call it an image, but whatever. Take some, I don't know what to call it, spectrum. Take some image, take something else of the taste or of the color or of the smell, and transfer it to your friend. So just like we have moved on from sending emails or sending telegrams to making phone calls and making video calls, tomorrow we may be able to transfer even more information very easily, and information which is related to different senses than our eye. So all of this are still open questions, and who knows, one of you might actually get into doing research into these topics and come up with a smell camera or a taste camera or something else that we have not even thought of so far. So all the best, and hope you enjoyed this talk.
Yes, students, you're open to questions. If you have any queries, you can ask, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, please.
Yes, sir, I have a doubt that you told that X-ray microscopes cannot be made. Yes, but why it is?
Okay, so see, how does a normal microscope work? So when I say X-ray microscope cannot exist, I just mean in the normal sense of the microscope. So in a normal microscope, you need to have a lens which will focus light. Correct? If you cannot focus the light, then the image is not formed. Now, X-rays cannot be focused because, see, the focusing of light depends on how the light interacts with matter. When light interacts with glass, there is refraction, and the refraction is responsible for focusing. Now, X-rays, unfortunately, do not refract in any ordinary materials. Okay, they can refract only in very, very strange media. Okay? So you cannot really refract X-rays the way you can have refraction of normal light. And if you don't have refraction, you cannot have focusing. And if you cannot have focusing, you cannot have an image.
Yes, sir.
So,
thank you.
right, so for X-rays, what the kind of images you get in a hospital or whatever, that is just a shadow. So X-rays pass through your hand or whatever, your broken part of the body. And wherever there is an obstacle in the form of a bone, you get a shadow. Right? Whenever there is an obstacle of some other form, you
Yes,
get a
sir.
different shadow. That's all it does.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, students, anyone else, any other doubts? Say this is, yes. Purva, you have a doubt?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Purva, but can you be a little louder? I'm faintly able to hear you.
So what is a contrast microscope?
A confocal microscope.
The contrast microscope.
Sorry,
Purva, can you type? Purva, can you just type it? You're
yes,
not
please type
clearly
it.
audible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, till then. Anyone else?
Sir,
Yes.
sir, what is the electron gun used for in the microscope? In the electron microscope?
So the electron gun is the device that provides the electrons. It supplies a beam of electrons. Just like a light beam, you need an electron beam, and the electron gun supplies the electrons that are needed for the imaging. Okay, you did you get the answer? Do you have something more to ask?
Yes, sir, I get the answer.
Okay. So Purva's question is about a contrast microscope. I think Purva, what you mean is a phase contrast microscope. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So phase contrast microscope. Yeah. So this is a little more technical. So what it means is it looks at how the reflection of light takes place from different surfaces, and based on the so you know any wavelength, any wave has an associated phase. So what it means is that when the amplitude of the wave goes from 0 to maximum back to 0, the phase is 0 at the first minimum and at the first 0. When the amplitude becomes maximum, the phase is said to be 90 degrees. And when it comes back again to 0, it is said to be 180 degrees. Now, how the light is reflected from a surface is decided by the properties of the surface. Now, in some cases, the phase of the light, well, in all cases, phase of the light changes. But in some cases, the phase of light doesn't change the way it does for ordinary light. So if you can detect the phase, okay, then you can say something about the properties of the reflecting surface. And that information is used to generate images. So it's actually considerably more complicated. Yeah, so this trick is also used in autofocusing in high-end cameras.
Students, this is what is a live example of a man with knowledge, making things so simple and interesting and quite different from what you study in your syllabus to get some marks. But I'm sure this session has created a lot of interest, at least in me, because see, I have read Sir's 2 research papers, one talk which he had given at PRL, I guess, PRL Ahmedabad. That is the introductory talk on ion molecule collision. And again, the further part of it, that is the orientation effect of the ion molecule collision at ISER. Right. So having read these papers, myself being from a MTech nanotechnology field, I have used my samples for characterization and all, but the mechanism of the microscopes, what Sir explained today, urges me to go back and see that the atomic force microscope which I used, AFM, what is the exact mechanism of the architecture of that microscope. Right. So, sir, I'm sure every one of them must have got a broader horizon of knowledge of how deep they should get into the mechanisms of it. Right? Yes. So, students, if you have any questions, you can get the questions to us. We will positively take those questions to sir and get you all the answers for the same. right? So on this note, I guess if you do not have questions, we would like to thank sir for this awesome time, at the time of intellectuality what we could see here. On behalf of the entire trust, sir, we express our sincere gratitude to you, and
Thank you.
we wish to be in touch for the forthcoming camps as well. I'm sure the students will definitely benefit from it, and we'll definitely try to do it on a larger scale next time. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So, fine, students, that's Professor Bapat. Anyone has any questions? I can see two hands raised. Okay. Okay. Sorry, who is speaking? You're not audible. Can we just type it? Yes, Avni. Avni wants to speak, right?
Avni, go ahead.
Okay. Are exams going to happen? Avni, we can ask doubts related to the content. General questions can be taken up later. Yes. Fine. So if there are no relevant questions to this, sir, thank you for the time.
Okay.
Right. And in the next camp, a new topic for sure, and the students will surely benefit from it. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Have a
Yeah.
nice day.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye. Yes, students. So two sessions today. One in mathematics, Professor Bhagwat, and Professor Bapat here. Someone is like, can I get a recording? Yes, you can connect with us for all the general queries. Right, you have a number. Right, you have a number in the WhatsApp group जहाँ पर आप हो वहाँ पे admin सर का जो number है आप उस पे अपने doubts पूछ सकते हो, है ना? Guys, one thing which I would like to point out is you all are listening to a scientist. Okay, a man full of knowledge. You have two sessions directly from the scientist at Pfizer. The topics are already displayed in our in the posters. Little homework on those topics will lead you to ask intelligent questions. Okay, so why do we ask? We request them to send the topics first, and we make posters out of it. We let you know who the person is so that you can go back, you can search about that person, you can read what work the person has done, you can ask them relevant doubts. Okay, this is how a particular session goes. And not only Inspire Camp, wherever you attend a lecture, a school lecture also, you know what the teacher is going to teach next. So थोड़ा उसके बारे में जानकारी लेकर जाना, that is the first step. Listening to the speaker and then absorbing some more knowledge is the second step. Okay, mixing or connecting the dots with your knowledge and the speaker's knowledge is the third step. That makes up a concept. Okay, because it is quite evident that when you're listening to a speaker, उस एक घंटे में आप सारे topics समझ के उसे उसके ऊपर सवाल पूछो या उसके concept वो सारे concepts clear कर लो, ये जरूरी नहीं होता. But then little background, little homework has to be done so that the session becomes really interesting and helpful. Okay, that is what is a teaching learning process all about. That is what a seminar, a webinar is all about. Right? So, students, that's all from our side. We are planning to come down to your school, college, wherever you all are. We have your data. We'll be conducting a small test also, for which you'll be getting a certificate for all these sessions which you have been attending. Okay, just for example, Rehan Sheikh has been attending all the sessions. So I know Rehan Sheikh. So there are many who are attending the sessions regularly. Okay, so on the basis of these sessions, we'll be coming down to your schools. We'll be conducting a small test. You'll be getting scholarship based on this. So this is something on a positive scale what we are doing. And ISER, Indian Institute of Science Education and Research, and the scientists from ISER are directly giving their precious time and knowledge. Right? With this note, we wind up today's session, students. Next Sunday, that is 2nd of January, we will be having Professor Shiv Prasad Patil, who will be talking on physics again. Topic will be sharing soon. And Dr. Arvind Nathusar, the chairman of IISER Kolkata and the convener of IISER Pune. He will be talking on a concept of chemistry. Right, so we'll be getting the posters next Sunday, same time from 10:30 to 11:45 first session, and again from 12 to 1:15 the second session. Right, so we rest the session here, students. Have a nice day of learning, of intellectuality, of fun. Be safe. Thank you all
Bye,
of
sir.
you.
Thank you, sir. Have a nice day.
Yes, thank you all of you.